and welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. And, of course, we have Harley Schlanger on a day early. Harley from the LaRouche Foundation, that's LaRouchePAC.com. And, of course, the EIR, Executive Intelligence Review, LaRouche, LaRouchePUB.com. Amazing three major stories we need to cover because the Jenga stick of Greece is now poking up for the game. And the fact that the Syriza party and the Tsipras and so on are having internal votes and basically turning down the European central banks and the IMF, I think that you're going to see the unraveling of the world economy. This is what I call the threadbare of the sweater of the world economy that's going to start pulling apart here starting in the next few months.
Well, the most important thing about the vote in Greece is that in spite of all the cowardly people walking around in the United States who said you cannot defeat the banksters, the Greek voters said, we're not submitting. We're not going to submit anymore. And this was a very significant vote. And you can't diminish the importance of this vote because what you have now coming from the small country of 10 million people was a defiant no to the bureaucrats in Brussels. Now, what happened then yesterday and today is the bureaucrats got together and they said, we don't give a fig for their vote. Right. We're going to do what we want to do, which is you're going to have to knuckle under. We need a new proposal from you. And what's the new proposal? It's got to include massive cuts in spending, which they cannot do without starving people. They're also withholding any funds as the clearinghouse for the Greek banks, which means the government is being forced to keep the banks closed for at least another day because they don't have funds in it for the expected runs on the bank. And so what this means is they're going for regime change. Now, that's what Merkel is trying to do from Germany. That's what Schäuble, the German finance minister. That's what Juncker of the European Commission. And Jessel Blum.
But don't they know in history, though, that an overt regime change with aggravated people that are put in jeopardy universally fails? Don't they understand that?
Well, I don't think they care. You see, I think what you're dealing with, you've got two problems you've got to address in this. One is you've got a bunch of oligarchs who do want to kill off people. And right. You and I have talked about this. LaRouche has been saying for years that when you look at the British monarchy, their view is we need a mass kill of human beings.
Yeah, but
and they're doing
the main
everything
defense,
they can to facilitate it, including turning
the main defense that the oligarchs and these globalist killers, whether it's pro-abortion or pro-eugenics, which is in Obamacare, or the European central banks and the world banks, basically they want to reduce the population like the Georgia Guidestones, 90%. Their primary defense is the ignorance of the people. Once the people realize they really are trying to kill you, starve you to death, and take away all your pensions so you can't buy food and can't have shelter, guess what? When people start to actually wake up and realize, yes, they are sawing off my right leg because I can feel the bone saw down to the bone of the femur, then they wake up and start kicking and fighting. And I don't think
it helps when you have leaders who show an example of not capitulating. Because if you look at the U.S. Congress,
right,
they're going along with the same policies that the Greeks rejected. Obamacare, for example. I don't know if I'm sure you saw this because you pay attention to this, but a few days ago, Aetna bought Humana for $35 billion, meaning they now have 33 million clients or suckers.
Wow.
Then Anthem is offering $47 billion for Cigna. Now, the argument of the insurance companies is by getting bigger, we'll be able to be more efficient and provide better service. That's a lie. It means they're able to shed workers, cut back on their expenses overall, and including hiring more people who will tell you that you're not covered. Now, it's also reported that they're going to have a 20 to 30% increase in premiums next year. And how do they have so much money to do this? It's Obamacare. Under Obamacare, they're cutting expenses. They're cutting their payments for real medical care. number one. Number two, they're getting a subsidy from the government, which the traders in the Supreme Court just upheld, which is a lot of money flowing into the insurance companies.
That's going to end up going to court. There'll be states going to court to fight the Supreme Court. And basically, on the standing rights of the law, the Supreme Court's going to lose on this one. What's going to happen
the third way they make money is that they have very high deductibles so that people who are buying these subsidized policies aren't going to the doctor because if they couldn't afford the policy in the first place, how are they going to afford $5,000 or $10,000 deductible and another 40% on the next $5,000 out of pocket? People can't do it. There's actually a significant reduction in cost to the insurance companies because people aren't using their Obamacare.
I heard that they were going to even take away the clause of pre-embalming for an undertaking. So even that's not going to be covered. I think what they'll do is you get these new policies, you get a free body bag.
Free body bag, and they'll give you the drug of your choice to kill yourself.
Yeah.
So you'll have some freedom.
Actually, instead of the Schwinn ice cream truck, it'll be the Obamacare dispatch truck. They'll give you an ice cream first, and then they'll dispatch you.
Actually, this is true what you're saying. You know, in Holland, because they had legalized euthanasia, in other words, legalized so-called mercy killing, they didn't have enough room in the hospitals to handle all the people who wanted to take advantage of this great service. So they actually had units that could be dispatched to your door, very similar to what Kevorkian did. You know, he'd come over with his death machine and kill you. And they're now, California, I believe, is about to adopt the same assisted suicide bill as Oregon and Washington, where at a certain point, once you're past 70 or 75, they'll encourage you to kill yourself as opposed to get life-saving medical treatment.
Well, the fact is, though, that Obamacare already is eugenics. For example, if you have 72 years of age and you need a clipped aneurysm in your brain, this is actually, I'm quoting a neurosurgeon who said this. Under Obamacare, when it fully kicks in, which is this year, the hospital has to push you over to an ethics committee because you're older than a certain cutoff age. And the ethics committee meets on, say, a Tuesday morning, but you need the aneurysm clipped within 3 hours or the intracranial, what's called bleed, will dispatch you to the next world. So if that clipped aneurysm, which is a relatively straightforward procedure, it's pretty high tech, but you just like to stick a catheter up the groin or up the external carotid artery, small catheter, and you embolize it so that it doesn't end up clotting, and you're fine. And if you don't, you die pretty damn quickly. And it's easy to diagnose what the problem is with a CT scan, an MRI scan, and a angiogram, MRI, magnetic resonance angiography. All kinds of technologies. So the fact is that if you're over a certain age, they're not going to do a bypass operation on you under Obamacare, not going to be able to do even conventional paint-by-numbers chemotherapy. And people say, oh, no, Obamacare gives us insurance. So you can paste the insurance certificate on your dead body inside the casket or body bag, because that's how useful it'll be.
Well, and this is the intent. That's why I was saying that when you talk about how to deal with a crisis in Europe, the first thing you have to realize is it's not a Greek crisis, it's a Europe crisis. Secondly, there are people who are running things who don't care that they're shortening lives by cutting insurance, cutting health care, cutting food support, and so on. And the third is that the bureaucrats who are in there dealing out all this mishy-mash nonsense in defense of these policies, they're just doing their job, just as the Nazis who ran the concentration camps were doing their jobs.
You're quoting the Nuremberg trials, right, with Dr. Leo Alexander?
Yes, they knew or should have known that their policies would kill.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, wearing your SS stripes on your shoulder isn't a legal or emotional or ethical defense. And welcome back. And Harley, so there are real solutions to the problems, and in some ways it's a positive thing that these crises are happening right now, because I think we see a perfect example of Iceland. Maybe Greek will be the European version of Iceland, and maybe it also will be a warning sign to America if we start changing their basis for our economy, writing off debt, like getting the Glass-Steagall, putting in a credit system like you've talked about for years, a Hamiltonian credit system based on productivity, which we did in early America. In fact, it's interesting, on the break I mentioned that China has literally studied and incorporated the better aspects of what made America great, like the early Hamiltonian credit system and the banking systems were originally here, and they were literally taken over and destroyed, when in fact the Chinese now are building infrastructure in response to the downturn in the world economy. They built more infrastructure. Now, it doesn't say their economy is doing great, but it would be considerably worse if they didn't build infrastructure in response to it, instead of ballooning the debt and making a system that further hampers new business.
Well, let me take you to this whole question of the solution, because there's going to be a conference starting tomorrow in a Russian town called Ufa, which is going to be a conference of the BRICS nations. And in preparation for this, there were a series of articles put out in the official Russian pro-government publications that included lengthy interviews with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the wife of Lyndon LaRouche, on her role in organizing and catalyzing a response in the United States, both that was pro-BRICS, that is calling for the U.S. to join with the BRICS nations, but also was against the geopolitical regime change policies of Obama and his NATO allies. Now, this is very significant because we're about to see, as of tomorrow afternoon, Moscow time, the launching of a new bank, a new global bank, the new development bank of the BRICS nations. It's going to be capitalized initially at $100 billion, and they already have a team of bankers who are very experienced in international finance from India, China, Russia, and elsewhere, ready to start making loans. Now, what's interesting is I was just informed a little while ago that after running into a stone wall in Brussels, it's very likely that Alexei Tsipras, the leader of Greece, the Greek president, is going to be in Ufa either tomorrow or Thursday to discuss the possibility of Greece joining the BRICS, or at least becoming a partner in the BRICS Bank. Now, what's happening here is something that LaRouche has been fighting for years, breaking the power of the financial institutions centered on Wall Street and the City of London, and enabling potentially developing sector countries that have been straitjacketed by the International Monetary Fund for decades, which refuses to allow any investment to go into real physical economic development. Their big thing is that you have to have fiscal restraint, you have to have austerity, and virtually every country that's gone into IMF conditionalities has emerged from it in much worse shape, a smaller economy, less physical production, and more dependence on bailout loans. And so here we have a perfect opportunity where the Greek vote shows that for 10 million Greeks, their view is, and their view is a very informed view on this, they're right about it, that the policies imposed on them have been a complete, utter, total failure, and that the people imposing them, including the bureaucrats in Brussels and people like Angela Merkel of Germany, knew that the policies would not work. Now, this is really important from what you were saying earlier about people ready to fight back. If you know that the grouping that's supposedly getting you out of a crisis knows in advance that the policies they're forcing on you will make it worse, and that they continue to go ahead and do that, then you no longer have any responsibility to listen to them. And to go to your favorite medical analogies, if a doctor is prescribing something for you that's killing you, you have to break with the doctor. Now, this is what's happening with many groupings in Europe now. It's also, and it's interesting to me to watch this in the United States, we're seeing an emergence on the so-called libertarian Republican side, the original Tea Party sentiments, which are anti-bailout and anti-Obamacare, coming together with progressives on the Democratic Party side in opposition to virtually everything Obama's doing. It catalyzed around the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Obama forced through his alliance with the crooked John Boehner and Mitch McConnell. That is, Obama depended on the Republicans for that. And now it's continuing where Obama is trying to get Democrats and Republicans to re-up a commitment to give money to the IMF when the IMF publicly released documents this last week after they had been leaked. But they publicly released documents showing that they knew that their policies were failing in Greece, and Greece would need at least another $50 billion bailout in the next months. So this brings up the question that you just posed. If this system isn't working, what's the alternative? And that's where you see the BRICS coming forward with essentially a hard money approach. Not that it's gold backed per se, it's backed by production. They're saying we'll make loans to projects that will actually produce something, including physical goods and jobs. And that's how we created our country under Hamiltonian credit.
Exactly. In other words, what they did is they studied our system, identified the elements that make an economy work, maintain a velocity of money, maintain a credit-based system that produces infrastructure and goods and services you can trade with other countries, that increases the value of the country itself.
And one of the links I sent you that you'll post today is on Mrs. LaRouche's interview with the Russian media, which shows the extent to which the Russians, who are among the out-front grouping in this, and the Chinese, are studying specifically the works of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche.
Right.
That my associates are in the Russian media, in the Chinese media. Why? Because we're so important in the United States? No, because we've been proven to be right over the years.
Right, and the thing is, they're based on historical principles. They're actually the foundation of why America became the only superpower and the fall of the Russian Empire, because many of the elements were not there. And China is smart enough that they're trying to incorporate the principles of early America, and it's mutating from a centrally controlled communist government, because when it moves toward the BRICS nations, whether it's the BRICS nations themselves or a bigger world government, they will be in control of a new system, almost like the Bretton Woods system of a basket of currencies, which, of course, the globalists out of the City of London and Wall Street don't want. They don't want the BRICS nations having a seat at the table. They want to control the whole game. Right?
And they're not going to be able to control it because people won't accept it.
No, it's the game's over. It's people should accept the fact it is over. Welcome back, and so Harley, with these three papers, the solution is literally sitting right in front of us, isn't it? And I guess there's an open call this Thursday evening that Lyndon's going to do at 6 p.m. Pacific time, so people actually can get the number and actually join that kind of call in and make comments and so on directly with Lyndon. Tell us about these other papers and this call in.
Well, let me start with the call-in, because this does give people an opportunity to become much more involved and indirectly in the organizing process. Lynn is doing a call every Thursday night now. It's usually about an hour and a half. We've had between 400 and 800 people on since we started it 7 weeks ago. And it's an opportunity to call in and ask questions of Mr. LaRouche about how to organize, how to change the people around you so that we can change the country. And as I said, he gets on it directly, and we're not just giving the number out over the air, but if people would like to be on a call with him, call my office and either ask to speak to me or ask to have the number for the call, and we'll get that to you. So the number here is 800-922-2907. And again, it's to be on a call with Mr. LaRouche, who literally is at the center of this whole BRICS development, because his analysis of the crisis has been right. And the Russians know it. The people in China know it. A lot of people in the United States know of LaRouche's accuracy, but they don't want to admit it because they're still committed to a bankrupt system, and they're afraid to change it. So if you want to get on with Mr. LaRouche, the thing to do is call my office either today or tomorrow, and we'll get you the number for the Thursday night call. And that number to call to get the number is 800-922-2907. And this is a special offer for people who listen to your program, because I've been on with you for a number of years, and I know a lot of your listeners are committed to doing something, but sometimes they just don't get off the couch. And this is an opportunity to hear directly from one of the most important patriotic thinkers and constitutional thinkers in the country.
Yeah, and I think that although there's an ancient Chinese symbol that on one side it says opportunity, the other side disaster, I think we should look at this as an opportunity. It's a time where finally people are going to have to wake up and realize this is not theoretical anymore. It's hard business. And in fact, the central banks here in America should realize that if they don't get with the program and start dialoguing on a new world economy that's based on a different kind of standard, like a basket of currency and a fixed exchange rate, and that the credit system should be based on the actual capacity of countries to make business and intellectual and physical property, and they've got to get right off these debts, these giant debts that no one's going to pay off, need to be written off. This is part of Glass-Steagall, and it's as you say, an offensive weapon, but it has to be married to an international policy that is a win-win for everybody. We can't have just a small clique of London, the City of London and Wall Street winning, and everybody else, especially the BRICS nations that are now a major force, losing. They're not going to do it anymore. They're withdrawing. Even little Greece, 11 million people are basically saying, we're not doing this anymore. It's the same thing with the small nation of Iceland. Vikings, that grabbed Irish women when they went up to Iceland. Basically, they're saying, we're not doing this anymore a couple of years ago, and their economy is doing fine. In fact, they're doing better than the average in Europe. So I think it's an opportunity. I don't think it's disaster. It's the same way as Fukushima. I see the opportunity of, number one, how to remediate waste, how to start getting rid of the old-style nuclear industry and replace it with a new one based on nuclear fusion technology, how to replace it with replacement energy like the wing generator with Professor McCanney and other technology. These are all opportunities. We have to think of it. If you talk to people that are billionaires or successful, they always see failure as a means to turn something into a success. And that's what happens when you have a situation of a problem in a nation and you solve that. You not only solve it for yourself, you solve it for the future generations and for other nations. So this is really a template for us, an opportunity to change the way the world operates. And as we head toward a 29th of Elul, the wipeout or Shemitah year, I think it's a time to bring back a biblical principle that, as LaRouche says, if you don't wipe out this dead, it'll eat you alive.
The important thing is that there's now an opportunity because of what the Greek people did to stand up to the banks. And in the last 2 weeks, in addition to this program, I've done about 10 hours of radio a week. And I'll tell you, the most common complaint you get is people who say, you can't win, you can't change the policy. And you say, why? And these guys are too powerful. Now, the other line you hear a lot, well, the Rothschilds control the BRICS. Now, this started from the fact that it was a Goldman Sachs guy in 2002, I think, who came up with the name of the BRICS. And he was doing it to basically say, what are investment opportunities out there? Now, no one should trust Goldman. But the original idea of the BRICS came from Lyndon LaRouche in the 90s. And he initially talked about Russia, India, and China as a pole of opposition. This was picked up by Yevgeny Primakov, who was a top Russian, who was an opponent of Yeltsin and an opponent of the looting of Russia, and who was connected to people in the scientific community who were supporters of LaRouche. And Primakov put this idea forward. It was picked up by key people, and it was picked up by people around Putin, who looked at this and they said, why should we accept the free market open banking system of the West, which will only take our labor and our raw materials as a source of loot to pay off their bad debt, when we could use that instead to build our own economy?
Right.
And that was LaRouche's idea. That was Primakov's idea. It was a Hamiltonian conception. And it was postponed because of the Yeltsin interlude, where with Yeltsin the idea was, how do you make money through working with the KGB to set up with oligarchs these raw material companies? And that's what they did. Right. And when Putin came in, he said, no more of this. Now, the Europeans stupidly went to Putin and said, look, we want you to be part of Europe. We'll send money your way. We'll make you rich. The idea that the Europeans are worried about corruption in Russia, they went in and corrupted Russia in the 90s. And Putin finally said, we're going to have a different standard here. We're going to have a standard of physical production. Right. And so once this started, The question then became, how will Russia realize the potential they have with their strategic metals and so on? The answer is simple. Form an alliance with like-minded countries that also have an economy. And so that's where the Russia-China alliance, Russia-India, they brought in Brazil and South Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this becomes a new potential.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, in fact, what's going to happen is that this is a place of opportunity and disaster. For example, it's like God saying, basically, you can seize this opportunity and fix the problem, or it will cause world war. Because in a sense, we're in the economic phase of world war, or we can resolve it before we have a body count.
And that's exactly what the Mrs. LaRouche initiated a resolution that's been signed now by thousands of Americans, people all over the world, to replace geopolitics with cooperation, to have the United States join the BRICS. And this is the reality. Look, the Greeks are probably going to end up joining the BRICS because they're not going to get anything but the back of the hand from Europe. The irony is Europe says we believe in democratic values, and then you get a referendum, which is a democratic vote of over 60%, and they say we're not accepting your policies. Well, what about democracy? It exposes the hypocrisy of the bankers' dictatorship in Brussels.
Right. A lot of people think, well, if you destroy the big bank, we're not talking about destroying them. We're talking about restraining them and changing the structure in which they operate. You need big banks, but you need a system where you can't generate what I call a casino system of gambling on anything you can imagine to create artificial debt that sucks out credit from the real economy. That's what's happening, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Back in a moment with Harley. And amazing. Check out the links today, LaRouchePAC.com, LaRouchePOV.com. And welcome back. And Harley, let's continue. I'm very positive about this. In fact, I think the disaster to the Greek population and the fact they're finally, putting their foot down. And when you have a tiny nation like Greece, which is 2% of the European economy, when you have a tiny nation like Greece that basically has contracted their GDP by 25%, and the Europeans and the European Central Bank basically say, damn it, that's not enough. It's almost like saying to the diabetic doctor, well, we could take off your bad black toenail, but I think what we'll do is we'll take off your foot. And the next day he said, no, that's not good enough. We want to take off the hip, right at the hip joint. And you basically say, no, you're not taking off either the nail. I'm going to go to a podiatrist, or I'm going to go to my wife at home, or we're going to get some Nutridyne out and just trim off that dead nail, and we're just going to let it grow back as best it can. Well, the same thing goes on in the economy, and what I see happening is, to me, is a big wake-up call to the world and to these bankers. So if they don't get real, they're going to get unemployed. Because when the economy does crash, because it will, and I think some of the globalists think, well, they'll just replace it with a cashless system where they're control of everything with electronic divots. The underground economy will explode. It's like if they tried to shut down the internet, it'll go quiet for 6 months. And then we'll have encrypted peer-to-peer networks, and we'll have our own, quote, we want to call SideNet or XNet, and or XNets, in plural. Just like there's 12 cryptocurrencies now, which are, by the way, a lot of people are accepting cryptocurrencies. I want to see a crypto bartering system. I call it the EBC, or electronic bartering currency, where you can exchange currency, goods, services, intellectual property, ship things, and fully encrypted system that no security agency, including the FBI or no such agency, NSA or Brazilian security police or Interpol or whatever can break. And I want to make sure that system doesn't.
Here's the point, though. You can move to a new financial system in the open. We could do that now. The problem is we have most of the transatlantic governments that are committed to protecting a system which has collapsed. And in order to protect it, they've got to kill off what's left of production, seize the raw materials, and prepare for at some point writing down of debt when they control everything. Now, we've got to write down the debt now. The reason LaRouche has been pushing Glass-Steagall is that Glass-Steagall would essentially say, we're going to protect the deposits, the savings, the CDs that people have as their own accounts. And instead, we're going to write down the speculative debt. And we're not going to protect that.
So what
Now,
you're talking about, you're like a
opens
plastic surgeon that's dealing with a burn unit patient. We've taken out our oxygen electrode. We know where the demarcation line of the dead tissue is. And we're only going to remove the dead tissue so that it'll regranulate in and we can actually start grafting skin and the person can look like a human being again. So in other words, what you're saying is...
And that's the way you can then have new credit go into a banking system where the new credit is not immediately swallowed up to cover bad debt at face value. These
Right.
face values are a joke. They don't really exist. Let's shut them down. That's what you can do with Glass-Steagall. Now, Mr. LaRouche, as I said, is on the phone now every Thursday night to talk to people about this and get them into the movement to get Glass-Steagall. So if people would like to be on the call with Mr. LaRouche on Thursday nights, give my office a call after we're done with this program today, and we'll line you up for that. We'll get you the number and the code for it. But to do that, you've got to call us, and you call us at 800-922-2907. I'll give that number one more time. It's the number you call if you'd like to be on a conference call with Lyndon LaRouche this Thursday night. It's 800-922-2907. You call that number, and we'll give you the conference number and the code. 800-922-2907. Now, the importance of this is that there's new motion in the European Parliament to put forward a Glass-Steagall bill. The people in the European Parliament fell one vote short of getting this in a month ago, and so now what they're saying is they're going to go ahead and pursue it and get it done this time. And it's critical because what Glass-Steagall does is open the doors for new credit. Not funny money credit to back up bad debt, but real credit. And that's what you and I are talking about, which is a big difference from what people like Mitch McConnell are talking about, what Obama's talking about. They're talking about doing everything possible to save the bankrupt system.
Yeah, exactly.
And we want to put the bankrupt system into bankruptcy reorganization, which should have been done in 2008. And finally, 7 years after the debacle of 2008, the Greek people said, enough is enough, we're not going to go along with these demands for austerity. And that should be a sign to us. This is our opportunity to do it here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually this is, I'm very positive about this. I really think that although it's going to get messy, because I have a feeling that the powers that be are going to try to scramble to see if they can still maintain control. But that control is going to slip. I think that the 9-inch nail spike through the heart of the vampiric system, which is what it is, it's a vampiric system, that doesn't mind how many victims it creates. It's almost like the vampire keeps coming back and says, I'm sorry, I have to come back too early, and it will result in your death, but I have to have some blood tonight. And that's what the Europeans are saying to the Greeks. They're saying, I'm coming back too early, and I'm going to kill you, but, I have to have your blood tonight.
Yeah. And they're saying we have to have it because we won't survive without it. But
right.
All they're doing is pouring more credit into a bottomless pit. And so instead of solving the problem, they're making it worse. You've got to put an end to this at some point. And if you're not going to do it, then don't complain when they come and steal your deposits and steal your gold and steal your crops.
Yeah.
Because that's what will happen.
Yeah, it's quite true, isn't it? And the dangerous thing is people don't realize that this system could kill billions of people if it's not properly corrected. The first thing, and I quote the Bible, is it says, an omer of wheat for a day's wages, but do not touch the oil in the wine. What they're saying is the rich people, the ultra bankers, the billionaires, they're going to survive.
But they're intending to kill people. And
right, but their intention is they think that they're basically maggots, and they basically have the attitude of, well, we don't care if we survive marginally, but we want to survive on your dead bodies. And we don't care how much we destroy the world economy or bring it to the brink of world war, because an economic system and a debt system always results in war. In fact, war is always a result of debt of some form or other. Debt of land, debt of money, debt of power. It's all tied to the word debt. And when you have a system that doesn't wipe out debt and doesn't create a credit-based system, you're always going to result in war and death. Now, unfortunately, we're dealing with ecological catastrophes occurring at the same time as a human convergence of weapons of war that could end the human race and the biosphere. So right now, it's a very major issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is what people can talk to Mr. LaRouche about, to get his ideas on what you can do to participate in this. And so I would urge people, again, call my office, 800-922-2907. Get on the call with Lyndon LaRouche this Thursday night. Get your friends on the call. Let's really take this opportunity to bring it home in the United States.
Yeah, and I think that if we do, we might actually influence the process of the election is really to reform the parties. We can see all the parties have what I call metastatic political disease, if you want to call it. They are metastasized by political action committees and transnational corporations and corrupt politicians. And
lots of money.
Lots of money, career politicians, and people that basically have crazy ideas. Wanting to convert all the nuclear reactors to MOX reactors, which is dangerous. The idea of not properly servicing even the current ones we have or upgrading technology, even to make them safer, even if we don't replace them. What we have is a situation where we now have a policy by Obama driving toward this carbon credit system, which is a black hole. It doesn't really give you replacement energy. It just says we got to reduce CO2. The only way to do that is to reduce the economy itself, because you don't have a zero oxygen consumption,
and
zero pollution technology.
As anyone who's serious knows, that's not sustainable. The idea that it's sustainable to cut back on energy flux density to some lower form of energy, it's not sustainable. You have to kill people to be able to sustain life with it.
Right. So you have to transform the society and create new energy technologies, new ways of energy replacement, new types of economies. What are you going to do in 20 years' time when 60 to 70% of all goods and services are provided by robots? What are you going to do? You have to have a whole different kind of economy so people can still be employed, creating physical intellectual property, still feel a worthful life, and have an economy where other nations are not vassals and destroyed, or populations wiped out because of debt and the craziness of the international banking system.